The night was blacker than oil. June 7th, 1944, off the western coast of the Philippines. The sea was calm, but beneath its stillness lurked a hunter. 200 feet below the surface, in the narrow metal belly of the USS Harder, SS-257, every man held his breath. The faint hum of electric motors filled the control room. Red lights bathed the faces of 30 men, silent, waiting, watching. At the periscope, Commander Samuel D. Dealey leaned forward. Through the glass, he saw faint silhouettes, Japanese destroyers, cutting across the horizon in rigid formation, escorting their convoy northward. They believed no American submarine would dare come this close to land, this close to danger. Dealey whispered a single word to his crew. Fire. A hiss of compressed air. Then, moments later, a thunderclap beneath the sea. One destroyer erupted into flame, its hull cracking open like thunder splitting the sky. Above the surface, Japanese officers screamed in disbelief. Below, Dealey's men reloaded in silence. The hunt had just begun. The Pacific War was turning, and Japan was about to learn the price of underestimating a single submarine. By the summer of 1944, the tides of the Pacific War had turned against Japan. What began in 1941 as a swift conquest across Southeast Asia had become a desperate struggle for survival. The once mighty Imperial Navy, victorious at Pearl Harbor, Singapore, and the Philippines, was now bleeding in every ocean. The Allies had seized the initiative. American carrier task forces roamed the Central Pacific, island by island, pushing toward the Japanese homeland. Air superiority was no longer contested, but beneath the surface, a quieter, more relentless war was being fought, a war Japan was dangerously unprepared to face. For Japan, the lifeline of empire ran through the sea. From Borneo, the oil fields. From Malaya, the rubber and tin. From the home islands, troops and weapons for the defense of distant outposts. Every drop of fuel, every ton of steel, every grain of rice had to move across vast waters. Without its merchant convoys, Japan's war machine would starve, and that lifeline had begun to unravel. American submarines, once dismissed as an afterthought, had become Japan's most lethal enemy. By 1944, fewer than 2% of the U.S. Navy's personnel served in submarines, yet they were responsible for over half of Japan's maritime losses. The ocean had become a graveyard for convoys. But it hadn't been that way from the start. In 1942 and early 1943, U.S. submarines were plagued by faulty torpedoes, hesitant commanders, and confused doctrine. Torpedoes detonated too early, too late, or not at all. Submarines attacked timidly, firing from too far away, diving too soon. Japan's supply routes, though stretched thin, continued to operate. Then came a new breed of commander, bold, aggressive, and unafraid to bring the fight directly to the enemy. Men like Dudley Mush Morton of Wahoo, Richard O'Kane of Tang, and Samuel D. Dealey of Harder. They transformed submarine warfare from cautious observation to predatory assault. Dealey's background was as calm as his future actions were ferocious. Born in Dallas, Texas, and a graduate of the Naval Academy, he was quiet, thoughtful, and deeply religious. But beneath his modest manner burned a fierce resolve. His men called him Sam Dealey, never sir. He led not with blood. By 1944, Dealey and his Harder had already earned a formidable reputation. 5 patrols behind them, dozens of ships sunk, a growing legend among submarine crews. His name carried weight not just in American bases, but in the whispered fear of Japanese convoys. Japan, however, did not fully understand what it faced. The Imperial Navy's convoy system remained rigid and outdated. Escort destroyers were few, their sonar technology primitive. Communications were fragmented. Radar sets were scarce. Convoy commanders often relied more on instinct than data, and their confidence in Japan's superiority, once justified, had turned into dangerous arrogance. The Philippines and the South China Sea had become a bottleneck. Dozens of convoys passed through those waters each month, bringing oil from Borneo and troops to reinforce island garrisons. Each convoy's safety depended on discipline, coordination, and speed. Yet by mid-1944, those qualities were failing. When the Harder left Fremantle, Australia for her 5th patrol in May 1944, her mission was simple but perilous. Penetrate the heavily guarded waters around Tawi-Tawi, a forward Japanese fleet anchorage in the Sulu archipelago, and attack enemy warships supporting the defense of the Philippines. It was a suicide mission by any measure. Dealey knew it, his crew knew it, but their orders were clear. Strike deep, strike hard, and disrupt Japan's defenses before the U.S. invasion fleet arrives. Ahead of them lay some of the most dangerous waters in the Pacific: narrow straits, shallow channels, and constant air patrols. The Japanese believed no submarine could survive there. They were wrong. Dealey's first sighting of the enemy would come sooner than anyone expected, and his actions in the days that followed would defy every rule of submarine warfare. The Harder was about to become a legend beneath the waves. The Japanese Empire had built its military power on the foundation of maritime supply. Every destroyer, carrier, and bomber in its far-flung empire depended on convoys steaming from the resource fields of Southeast Asia to the home islands. But by 1944, that supply network was collapsing under invisible assault. Between Formosa and Borneo, across the narrow lanes of the Sulu and Celebes seas, Japanese transports formed long, vulnerable columns. Each carried vital cargo: crude oil, aviation fuel, ammunition, or troops bound for the Philippines. Escorts, often a handful of overworked destroyers, tried to guard them, but the numbers no longer matched the need. Radar and sonar were crude copies of British sets, plagued by maintenance issues. Training for anti-submarine warfare was minimal. The Imperial Navy had never expected to fight for control of its own shipping lanes. Admiral Ichi Koga's combined fleet was trapped in a cruel paradox. To defend Japan's empire, it needed fuel. But to get fuel, its ships had to traverse seas now dominated by American submarines. By early 1944, Japanese tankers were being sunk faster than they could be replaced. Some bases were rationing oil to a few gallons per aircraft sortie. Even destroyers were ordered to cut back on training cruises to conserve fuel. And still, Tokyo's naval staff clung to confidence. Convoy commanders reported that American submarines do not operate near our fleet anchorages. That assumption would soon prove fatal. In May 1944, the Imperial Navy assembled a large force at Tawi-Tawi, an island group near Borneo. The anchorage bustled with battleships, cruisers, and carriers preparing for the defense of the Marianas. It was, effectively, the beating heart of Japan's naval operations, protected, they believed, by geography and distance. Into this cauldron sailed the USS Harder. Commander Samuel Dealey had been briefed personally by Vice Admiral Ralph Christie at Fremantle. He was to patrol near Tawi-Tawi, report fleet movements, and attack any targets of opportunity. The risk was extreme. The area was shallow, with strong currents and daily air patrols. Submarines had rarely returned from such missions. The Harder was a Gato-class submarine, 311 feet of steel, equipped with 10 torpedo tubes, 4 aft and 6 forward. On the surface, she could reach 20 knots, submerged, barely 9. Her endurance came from stealth, not speed. Every crewman understood that once discovered, survival depended on nerve, silence, and luck. Dealey's crew had become a finely tuned machine. They had spent months together in the confined heat of the boat, sleeping beside torpedoes, breathing recycled air, and enduring constant drills. Each man trusted the other completely. When Dealey gave an order, it was obeyed instantly, without question. They entered the Sulu Sea in late May, slipping past patrol craft under the cover of darkness. The hydrophones crackled with propeller noise. Convoys everywhere. The Japanese were moving troops from Singapore to reinforce Biak and Halmahera. Destroyers prowled the channels, their searchlights sweeping the water. What the Japanese didn't know was that their security system worked against them. Convoy schedules were predictable. Escorts used repetitive patterns, and communications were poorly encrypted. U.S. intelligence, via code-breaking and reconnaissance, fed Dealey precise data. The Harder wasn't hunting blindly. She knew roughly where and when her prey would appear. On June 6, Dealey's radar picked up the first contact, a small convoy escorted by the destroyer Minazuki. The next day, the Harder fired 4 torpedoes and sent Minazuki to the bottom. The explosion was so violent it was detected by distant Japanese bases, but local commanders dismissed the reports. They insisted it must have been an accident or a mine. That disbelief set the tone for what followed. Each time the Harder struck, the Japanese command refused to accept that a single submarine was operating inside their supposedly secure waters. They doubled down on denial, ordering more ships into the same danger zone. Dealey understood their psychology. 1. The human angle. Life beneath the waves. Inside a World War II submarine, time lost its shape. Days blurred into endless cycles of heat, sweat, and tension. For the crew of the USS Harder, every dive was a brush with death. The air was thick with diesel and oil, the temperature often above 100 degrees. Metal walls sweated condensation. The smell of unwashed clothes, machinery grease, and battery acid filled every compartment. Sleep came in fragments, 4 hours at a time, in narrow bunks stacked 3 high. When a torpedo was loaded, the men slept beside it, knowing it was both their weapon and potential coffin. The constant hum of engines and the faint hiss of compressed air were the soundtrack of their world. But beneath the discomfort was a sense of brotherhood. Every man aboard Harder understood his role in something far larger than himself. The sonar operator, headphones pressed tight, listening for distant propellers. The helmsman, steering by instinct and voice commands. The cook, preparing meals on a swaying stove. And at the center of it all was Commander Samuel Dealey, calm, deliberate, and unshakably confident. His leadership style was quiet but absolute. He never raised his voice. His presence steadied even the most frightened sailor. In moments of crisis, he'd stand in the control room, one hand on the periscope handles, his tone so composed that panic simply couldn't take root. His men later said, "When Dealey looked through that scope, you knew something was about to die." Life aboard Harder was measured in whispers and seconds. A single sonar ping could mean discovery. A single wrong maneuver could mean a slow, crushing death at the bottom of the sea. Yet, to those 70 men, the submarine was more than steel. It was home, a floating heartbeat in the middle of enemy waters. 2. The technological angle. Tools of the silent service. The Harder represented the cutting edge of 1944 submarine warfare. The Gatto-class design was rugged, adaptable, and lethal. It could dive to 300 feet, carry 24 torpedoes, and remain at sea for 2 months without resupply. But the true power lay in the technology that allowed it to stalk prey unseen. American submarines had learned from bitter experience. Early in the war, their Mark 14 torpedoes had been disastrously unreliable, running too deep, failing to detonate, or circling back on the firing sub. But by 1944, those flaws had been largely corrected. The Mark 18 electric torpedo, though slower, left no telltale bubble trail, and Dealey's crew had mastered both types. The Harder's radar could detect ships at night long before they were visible on the horizon. Its sonar, the ears of the boat, could read the distance and bearing of enemy destroyers, even through layers of thermal current. In Dealey's hands, these instruments became extensions of instinct. He trusted his senses, but he also trusted the new science of underwater warfare. The Japanese, meanwhile, lagged far behind. Their sonar, copied from early British models, was crude and unreliable. Their radar was scarce and often misused. Many escort destroyers lacked the discipline to operate in coordinated search patterns. Some commanders still preferred visual lookouts over electronic instruments, believing that samurai eyes were sharper than machines. It was a fatal misjudgment. When Harder prowled near Tawi-Tawi, she was often within a few miles of Japanese destroyers, but they never knew. Dealey used the thermal layers of the sea, hiding his submarine below temperature gradients that distorted sonar returns. He could hear them, they could not hear him. Every engagement was a test of nerves and physics. When the submarine fired, the torpedoes swam out silently, guided only by preset gyroscopes. Seconds stretched into eternity as the crew counted under their breath. 1001, 1002, until the sea erupted. Technology gave Harder her edge.